Hello and good morning. Welcome to another digital wildlife walk with myself, Russell Headley from Nature Talks and Walks. I'm here with a good group of people for the first talk, or walk I should say, of February 2021. And this walk is all about the early spring flowers. And it's an appropriate time to do this because I don't know about you guys, but here in Bolton where I am, we have had more of a classic winter with plenty of snow and frost actually. And that continued until yesterday. So yeah, more normal. And that means that the spring flowers won't be far away. Some of them are already out, actually, even in Bolton. So we're going to explore the differences that we can find. So I'm going to share my screen now, and we'll dive into the presentation. So you should be able to see the title screen there, and then you should be able to see the full presentation here. And I'll just move myself just a bit higher there. Flowers can start flowering, I would say even in January, to be honest, some of them. And it depends on the temperature some years. If it's been a particularly warm winter, some flowers can just keep going through the winter. But this year has been more, as you'd expect, with colder climates. So perhaps, and I'm going to stress perhaps, the flowers will be more on time. But we'll cover a list of them today. As always, I don't think I need to do this anymore. You've all stopped your video for now, which is good because that helps with the quality of my voice and the presentation. You're all on mute as well, just to make sure that everyone can hear the presentation nice and clearly. But at the end of the presentation, if you'd like to ask an audible question, you can always press the unmute button at the bottom left of your screen. And throughout the presentation, you can always type questions into the chat box. I can't read chat box whilst I'm presenting, but the first thing I do when I finish is check chat box for any questions that anyone has had as well. Okay, so starting off with our flowers. I know that there's a few botanists in our group today, so many of you may already have been out looking for flowers, but it's certainly not too early. We think of flowers, I suppose, as a springtime event, and that's very true. But some plants want to get ahead of the competition, if you will, and they flower very early in the spring or late winter even to try and monopolize the few insects that are waking up. And this is one of them. Some of you may have seen this picture before. This is a picture I took a few years ago now in central Bolton at a brownfield site, which is basically an old building. This is actually the Odeon Cinema in Bolton as was. It's now just the remains, but this flower is covering the floor of the old cinema, and it's the fabulous colt's foot flower. This species of flower is a relative of the daisy, so it's in the daisy family. And if you imagine the petals being white, you can actually see that the shape is quite similar to the daisy itself. Very fine petals, very thin all the way around. So again, easy to recognize. And it's a very early flowering plant. You could find it in January if the conditions are right. And it's very good at surviving in kind of urban areas between the cracks in our brickwork sometimes and our gravel at the sides of grids in the road. So you can find it nearly anywhere. So keep on the lookout for it. One other way to prove that it is colt's foot at this time of year is because, as you see in the picture, the flower is there, but what's missing is the leaf. It has no leaf whatsoever at this time of year. The flower comes first to attract the insects to pollinate, and the leaf comes second later in the year. And this is a strategy by this plant to get that monopoly on the earliest insects that are around. The leaf, therefore, is really quite large and broad. And if they grew at the same time, the leaf might actually shade out some of the flowers that the plant is trying to attract the insects with. So it decides not to try and compete with itself. It puts the flowers out first and the leaf second. The leaves have got this brilliant white fuzz all over them. You can see that these are younger leaves, so the fuzz is on the top and on the stem. As they get a bit older, that fuzz will start to disappear and they'll become more naturally shiny green. But the underside is always slightly soft and fuzzy white. So that can help you identify it. Plus, the name of the plant comes from the fact that the leaf is said to have a horseshoe shape, hence the name colt's foot. And that's supposedly where it gets the name from. Plus, any of you that are in the north may recognize the name Colt's Foot Rock as a traditional sweet of the British Isle, using extracts of colt foot and creating a rock-like candy or sweet that's very good for digestion, so I'm told. Alongside colt's foot, another early flower is butterbur, which is related, actually. It's not too far away from colt's foot in terms of which family it sits in, but it looks very different. And it's the same idea. Butterbur puts the flower up very early before the leaf. So it's a bit of an oddity when you find them, because they're kind of, especially when they're first growing, I've got a picture to show you in a moment, but they look very dark red and they almost look like a gone off flower. First of all, it's only when you double look at them that you'll see the actual petals of butterbur. This species of plant loves wetland habitats, so boggy areas or marshy areas or places with poor drainage, butterbur does very well. So that's another way to know what you're looking at, by looking at the habitat that it sits in. This is a picture of it when it's just starting to flower, and as you can see, as I described, there's this funny kind of texture that doesn't make you think of a flower really. It looks like it's a bit gone off. The leaves of this plant are enormous. I don't have a picture of them here on this presentation, but they are you know, about 60 centimeters across, and they have been used for several reasons in the past. One use of them was as a sun hat for workers in the field. If you were nearby some butterbur, you could take one of those leaves and just pop it on your head, and it would give you some shade from the sun when you're working in the fields. But also the name comes from the fact that those leaves were also used to wrap butter in and to keep butter fresh. And that's where the name comes from. One of the other interesting names for this plant refers to this stage of it as well, which are flowering or should be flowering around now. Because of their appearance, they're called early mushrooms. A close relative that can be found in Britain but is not native is winter heliotrope. Winter heliotrope grows in a slightly different way, because as you can see in the picture, the leaf actually grows at the same time as the flower. And you can see that kind of shape that I described. It's a similar shape to butterbur, but not exactly the same. And winter heliotrope has a strong scented winter flower, and these lovely light green, glossy looking leaves. It's native to southern Europe, but can be found in woodland or in hedgerow habitats, so not exactly the same as the kind of boggy habitats that butterbur prefers. But I've seen this in the middle of Welsh countryside in the past, and in the middle of close to urban areas of Manchester. So it can crop up in interesting places throughout the UK, so it's worth keeping an eye out for. And yeah, the leaf really helps you separate it from butterbur. And there's a close-up shot of the flower. Quite a nice subtle flower with not too many colors, different heads. You see different clusters together that are on their own stalks as well, that can help you identify winter heliotrope. But of course, at this time of year, I may be skirting around the classic flower that we think of in early spring, which is, of course, the snowdrop. Believe it or not, despite the fact that snowdrops are very well recognized and, let's say, very common across Britain, they're not actually native to Britain. They were first recorded in being in Britain from 1778. But it is said that the botanist John Gerard described them in 1797. So we can safely say that they've been here for quite some time, and they were brought here probably for their beauty, really. In the winter months, they open up and they've got this gorgeous little drop of snow that hangs down. They grow by bulb systems underground, and there are many different varieties of snowdrop to enjoy. They have enjoyed a diversity because of their popularity with humans. So people have bred all different varieties of snowdrop. The differences between them can be very subtle. If you look at this picture, the difference is often in that green mark on the petals themselves. You have to actually look underneath a snowdrop to sometimes check which variety it is. And there are around 2,500 varieties of different looking snowdrops. So you've got your pick of what you want in your garden. And the most expensive snowdrop that was ever sold was sold for, now you can guess at home what you think it is first of all. How expensive do you think the most expensive snowdrop bulb was? And the answer is, this is a good pub quiz question if we could go to pub quizzes at the moment. The answer is £1,390 for one singular bulb of a very rare variety of snowdrop, bought on eBay in 2015. Alongside the snowdrops, I think this is probably one of my favorite wintering flowers. This is winter aconite. It's a beautiful globe-like yellow flower. It's not quite as big as the picture portrays it, though. Each of those flowers is perhaps the size of a 5-pence piece in diameter. So it's not a huge flower. But again, it can be found commonly planted because of its beauty in the winter months across Britain, and it is a relative of the buttercup. And once you know that, when you look at it, you think actually it does look like a buttercup in its flower at least. The genus name, which is down at the bottom right of this picture, Aeranthis, comes from the names for spring, which is spring, and anthis, which is flower. So this quite literally is the genus of the spring flowers. I wouldn't say it's a regular find, but if you keep your eyes peeled, especially in kind of places where there has been planting in country parks or things like that, then you might find this. And I've got some in my garden. You can buy them in garden centres as well. Great splash of colour, great for wildlife. As of course is the spring crocus. Again, I don't know about you guys, I've got them coming up at the moment. They're not in flower just yet, but they won't be far away. Being a flower that copes with February appearances requires them to have certain adaptations to cope with frost, cold temperatures, and snow. And as such, the entire plant, the leaves and the petals, have a waxy cuticle all over their body, I'll call it. That means that they can cope with the colder temperatures. A lot of flowers would not be able to do that because they don't have the protection from the cold. And so spring crocuses have to have something a little bit extra to give them a bit of help. Saffron is a product, of course, of the crocus, and 90% of the world's saffron as a spice is harvested in Iran from the crocus flower. And just to give you an idea of the scale of what you have to do to get saffron and why it's one of the most sought after spices on the planet, it takes about 85,000 flowers of the crocus plant to produce 1 kilogram of saffron. So if you ever use saffron in your cooking or anything like that, you can think about the spring crocus and think that's amazing that has come from this plant and from many of the plants as well. Now, as we walk digitally through our flower walk, let's jump forward a little bit, perhaps to early March, I would say, at least for me in Bolton here. If you live down south, this might happen a lot earlier, but lesser celandine won't be far away. I've seen lesser celandine flowering in January, to be honest, in some years. So it could be flowering around you at the moment. This is, again, another brilliant indicator that spring is on the way. And indeed, the name lesser celandine is connected to the swallow, which is the other herald of spring. So the two of them together, and with a number of the other plants, are seen to herald in the warmer months. Lesser celandine grows in large communities. If I just jump ahead there we go. You can find them in little clumps, but generally speaking, if you're in a wilder area, you find swathes of lesser celandine in March, again taking advantage of those first awakening insects to the pollinators to get pollinated before anyone else. And it's a lovely plant. I tend to find it, you can find it in woodland, let's say under an oak tree or something like that. You could find it there, but I tend to find it a lot around water systems and wetter conditions. That's where it really seems to explode in number. Is the lesser celandine, beautiful flower to keep an eye out for. As is, of course, the long name of opposite-leaved golden saxifrage. Now, this flower is quite an understated one. It's a small flower, and this in the picture is as far as it goes. Your thumbnail would probably take up a third of the plant you're seeing here. It's very small and very subtle. But again, it can grow in large numbers. And again, it often grows in damp areas, particularly in woodlands. So if you're in a woodland and there's some slopes where water is draining down to a stream system, you'll often find that opposite-leaved golden saxifrage grows in huge amounts down the system, down the stream system towards the river at the bottom. In terms of where you find this flower, it's more common in the west of the UK than the east, because naturally it's wetter in the west than the east, so this flower prefers that. So in Bolton we have quite a good amount of it around us, and there is an alternative species which is appropriately named the alternate-leaved golden saxifrage, which is rarer than opposite-leaved. But if you really want to get into detail, you can get down on your hands and knees and check the leaves, because on opposite-leaved, obviously the leaves are directly opposite, and on alternate, they are slightly different heights on the stem. One leaf comes off at one height and the next leaf comes up at a different height. So if you wanted to check, that is a way that you could check. Another interesting fact about this flower, it was the county flower for, now get ready for this, Clackmannanshire, which is, some of you may know, a historic Scottish county. So it was once a county flower. Primroses as well, very early to flower in woodland places or in hedgerow again. These nice kind of light, very light yellow colored petals with the darker yellow center. Very attractive flowers, primrose. And the wild primrose is Primula vulgaris, vulgaris meaning common. And that doesn't mean that you only find them in this color. Primroses are readily available from many garden centres, and many people have them in their gardens because of their early rising and their very early flowers in the year. And you do get different colours of them as a result. Sometimes you get primroses that have escaped from gardens and got into the wild. And I've found sometimes that people want to plant those versions of primrose in kind of ancient woodland settings. And you have to very politely ask them to stop, because that isn't the best thing. Some of those varieties may well be infertile and not provide food for insects. They may look good, but they may actually be useless in a wild setting. So this is the version that you want, kind of the cream petals is the one you're looking for. Of course, primula, primrose, stems from the word primus, meaning first or early. So it quite literally is the early flower. The leaves of the flower are edible and can be consumed in a salad-like form. Another interesting facts. And the young flowers in certain practices can even be used to create a sort of wine as well. I cannot claim that I've had either of those or any of that, but those are some interesting facts that you might want to take forward into spring. One of the violets that comes out very early in the year as well is early dog violet. Now, if we're in kind of March, especially, and you see a violet, it's a really good indication that it's an early dog violet because it's so early. Dog, and I think this comes up shortly as well, the name dog in there refers to the fact that it's unedible, so that it's not one that can be used. That's what it's saying there in the name, that this is not the one to use. There is another violet that you could use for something else. Early dog violet loves to grow in kind of shady areas of woodland, generally speaking, on the forest floor, where there's a lot of leaf litter going on. And so you'll probably see this purple flower poking its head up in a shady area. Could be in, again, in hedgerow. A lot of these flowers share the same kind of area that they grow in. And with violets, I could do a whole digital talk on the violets because there's a number of different ones in the country. The key to identifying which one is which at a glance is looking at the back of the flower. So in this picture, you have the flower on the left, which you're facing forwards, and then you have the flower on the right, which you can see a side view, and you can see the back of the flower. That's called the calyx. You see that long purple tongue sticking out of the back. That's the calyx. And that shape and color of the calyx is what will tell you what you're looking at. So here is an image that a friend of mine has done on violas. And you can see that when you compare the different species, you've got different shaped calyxes at the back of the flower. Some of them are white, as in the common dog violet. Some of them are curved, as in the sweet violet on the far left. And second from the right, you have the early dog violet with the long, straight calyx. And at a glance, that will tell you what you're looking at. You can also see there are various other details that will differ if you want to confirm them. But that is a quick fire way to spot the early dog violets. Particularly if you are looking under things like ferns that are starting to grow, that's another place to look for the early dog. And other than that, beautiful patterns on the petals as well. Fabulous flower. And here is the other dog. I knew there was another dog coming up shortly. This is Dog's Mercury, which from now, we're in our digital flower walk, which is fabulous that we can do this. We're going to step forwards a bit in time now through the wood, and we're still in the wood actually. A lot of the early flowers tend to be woodland flowers that can cope with kind of shadier conditions. Perhaps that's why. Dog Mercury, or Dog's Mercury, is not a showy flower at all. It doesn't have big showy petals. This is about as good as it gets for Dog's Mercury. It's got these really heavily serrated leaf edges, so that can help you identify it. It's not that glossy. It tends to be a bit more matte than gloss when you look at it. And that can be crucial. I once joined a group of volunteers at a site to do some Himalayan balsam removal. And when I talked to them about Himalayan balsam, and then there was Dog Mercury next to it, they wished that I'd been there the week earlier because they had actually been putting out Dog's Mercury thinking it was Himalayan balsam. So it's important that you recognize these differences before you start removing plants. Have I got another picture? Yes, I have. There's another picture of the flower of Dog's Mercury. Interestingly, within this species of flower, you get individuals that are male and individuals that are female. You do not get both sexes on a singular plant, which is one of the reasons why it's important to have a healthy population of Dog's Mercury to make sure that there's enough genetic diversity. And the flower is one of ancient woodland as well. If you have this and a number of other species, it could well suggest that you've got ancient woodlands. It's named after the Roman god Mercury, who allegedly discovered the healing properties of the plant. But the dog in the name again suggested it is unedible. So mercury is usable, but dog's mercury is not to be used. It is poisonous to animals. So that's where the name comes from. And around the same time, once the sun gets a little bit warmer, again, this is in the woodland, although occasionally I found it out in a field under a tree as well. So you never know where it might show up. But wood anemone is a brilliant white star with the fantastic yellow anthers in the middle there, brilliant colors. And also you see the dark leaves underneath it, really kind of red stems too. Everything about the foliage suggests a dark color. You see there, you've got the brilliant white flowers contrasting perfectly with the darker green leaves. And often for me, the dark green of the leaves is at a distance the thing that would say wood anemone if the flower wasn't even there. That would be to tell you what it was. This was also named after a god, a Greek god this time, Anemos, who sent his anemones, I don't know how they pronounced it, to herald spring. So this was sent by a Greek god to say that spring is here and that we can be joyful for that. It has a sharp, musty smell to it, which means that few animals eat it in the wild, and therefore the shows of wood anemone can last for quite some time because not many things try to eat it. And interestingly, when it does have seeds later in spring, they are mostly infertile. The best way this plant spreads is by slowly spreading through the root growth. And that means that it's vulnerable to the soil being dug up and moved around and created by humans, which is another reason why this is an ancient woodland indicator. It indicates that the soil has not been disturbed for a very long time if you've got a good amount of wood anemone, which is one of the reasons why we look for it to prove if there is ancient woodlands. A few more species to finish off today. Wood sorrel, brilliant. I love this plant. This is another one that you can find within the woodland early in spring. Really pretty flowers with the lovely purple veins running through each petal with a lovely bit of yellow at the heart of it. Excellent to see. The leaves are lime green. They're very bright green, and they have 3 leaves that are heart-shaped. It's crucial to look for that heart-shaped to prove that it's wood sorrel, because you can eat the leaves of this flower, and it gives you a very tarty apple taste. It's quite nice when you eat 1 or 2 on a walk, and it's rich in vitamin C. It was used to treat scurvy back in the day. But I will please ask that you make sure that you have the right plant before you eat it. A friend of mine, who I once showed wood sorrel to in spring, later in the year rang me up in a panic because he'd eaten wood sorrel, but his mouth was burning and he wasn't sure what was wrong. And what was wrong was that it wasn't the season for wood sorrel, and the shape of the leaf he'd eaten wasn't heart-shaped, and it turned out to be petty spurge, which is acidic and dangerous. But he was fine. He was absolutely fine. It wasn't a problem for him or for a human who just eats 1 and spits it out again. But yes, whenever I say you can eat part of a plant, please make sure that you have a book with you that can help you, or that you know what you're looking at before you eat it. I've got to mention bluebells, and we're moving forward into April now, kind of central spring, when you get that lovely sway of bluebells. Of course, most of us want to see the English bluebell that has the stereotypical hanging head with the little bluebells hanging below them, and they're more delicate than other species of bluebell, and they grow by bulbs in, again, woodland habitats. But there is an invasive problem for the English bluebell, which is the Spanish bluebell, that can interbreed with our native Spanish bluebells were brought over in the garden trade and have escaped into the wild in many places. And if you look inside a bluebell flower, to prove which one you're looking at, look at the anthers, these long sausage shapes inside the bluebell. The color of those will dictate which you're looking at. If the anther is white, you're looking at an English bluebell. So if it's white, it's all right. That's how I remember it anyway. If it's blue, like this one, then that means you're looking at the Spanish bluebell, which is the invasive species, which is more robust, stronger, and flowers that are not hanging down so much. They tend to kind of stick out to the sides a little bit more. Of course, you can get pink anthers, and that probably means you've got a hybrid instead. So you're really looking to find the white anthers to prove that it's pure English bluebell where you can find it. And lastly, at the same time of year, we have one of the first orchids of the year. And it's really exciting to say that because it's coming back around to orchid season. And I personally love orchids. The early purple orchid is one of the first we find in the country and is dark purple and tends to live in woodland areas. But as you can see in the picture, can be found out in grassland at woodland verges as well. And I have also found it in kind of limestone pavement habitats, chalk downland, grassy banks, and non-acidic soils. And it can range in color from dark purple to white. So it can be a bit tricky if you're new to orchids to work out which one it is. But also notice the leaf at the bottom is speckled with a kind of rust colored as well. Legend says that the early purple orchid was growing under the cross that Jesus was on, and that drops of his blood spattered onto the leaves of this orchid, and hence the appearance in the picture here. And this gives it the other name of the cross flower. Not only is it called the cross flower, but there are a multitude of common names for the early purple orchid. Many of them aren't used anymore, but just to rattle off a few to you, you could name this flower adder's meat, bloody butchers, red butchers, goosey ganders, keck legs, kettle cases, and kite's legs. I love old English names for flowers because they're on paper in black and white. The meaning of them is almost completely lost. But yeah, it's some great research to be had there and some really fun names to mess around with. A touch on conservation then. If you're into your flowers and your botany and you want to help the rarer flowers and to help their long-term protection, there's the Wildflower Society that you can join, which normally hosts events where you can go out with an expert and look at flowers and discover your local patch. And there's also Plant Life as well, which is a large organization looking after some of the rarer flowers in the country. So thank you very much for watching. As always, if you want to subscribe to the rest of the February month, it's just £9, and then you can watch all of these for under that and live, and you can also watch them on repeat as well afterwards. So I'm going to stop sharing there. Thank you very much, everyone watching on the recording on YouTube. I hope to see you again very soon.